Hi, I'm Gareth Kane, and welcome to the Net Zero Business Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Marcelle McManus, Professor of Energy and Environmental Engineering and Director of the Sustainable Energy Systems Research Centre at the University of Bath. So welcome to the podcast, Marcelle.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, you have a fantastic breadth of knowledge, and I'm really looking forward to digging into it. But I like to start by asking my guests, how did this all start for you? When did you start into the sort of clean energy world?
Yeah, so I guess I've always been passionate about the environment. So, as with many, it started with an inspirational teacher who really opened my eyes to the world and what was going on around me. I remember in one of his classes, he showed us um, some of the impacts of desertification, and he really made the subject come alive. And at that time, climate change and net zero wasn't really talked about as it is now. And my interest was then, as it still is, far wider. So I was concerned about, the desertification, as he taught us about soil pollution, atmospheric pollution, and really just sort of the impact humankind has on the ecosystems in the world around us. But I was also really interested in science and engineering and how things work. So I did a degree, and then I did a PhD, and the focus of my PhD was on understanding the life cycle impacts of hydraulic systems and fluids. And so, hydraulic systems, I was working with these big machinery, so things like working in the forestry machinery and also sort of road cleaners. In both of those cases, they wanted to use biodegradable oils in their systems for environmental reasons, but they wanted to understand whether that was actually better, and whether that caused more problems than it would solve. And my PhD work showed that whilst if they were spilled, then the biodegradable fluids were better in the environment. Actually, in the systems, they caused a lot of degradation. So making sort of the seals, etc., degrade. So that needed a lot more maintenance. So that didn't mean to say that they shouldn't be used. It meant that we needed to work out how to change the system around it. And I think that was the start of it, really understanding how the big picture fits in. So if we change one thing, it means changing something else. And from there on, I think I just was passionate about it and needed it to be my life.
And what were the steps then between your PhD and getting a chair at Bath University?
So I did a few jobs between those two things. I worked with penguins in New Zealand for a while, actually. Actually, that was before my PhD. But that was a wonderful job, and that really hit home the impacts of climate change because we were working with penguins trying to understand how why they were dying, and they were dying because of a lack of food. So I ended up stomach pumping penguins, which I don't think was probably on the normal trajectory of getting into clean power. But it really did sort of hone many different research skills. And I worked in policy for a while, and then I got a fellowship working on biodegradable systems, and then a lectureship, and here I am.
Yeah, just I can't let the penguins thing go too quickly. When you were stomach pumping these poor penguins, deceased penguins, presumably, was it plastic pollution or were their foodstuffs shifting their distribution because of warming seas? What was the issue that you concluded?
Yeah, so I was a very small cog in a big wheel on a long-term research project, but I do keep up with it. And what we saw was these poor penguins were not getting enough food, and part of that was to do with shifts in ocean currents. And so the fish that they would have normally eaten weren't getting to where they would normally go to get the fish. And also there was an awful lot of overfishing off the shores. I was working in New Zealand, as I said, so off the shores of New Zealand. And so they just really were suffering from a lack of food.
Yeah, yeah, that's very sad. And the same's happening. I live in the northeast of England, and the same's happening. Our coast is sand eels are tending to head
With the
north.
puffins.
The puffins aren't,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
if they don't change their habits, they unfortunately the natural selection might be coming from
Yeah.
for them. But that's not something we can solve here, really. But the reason why I invited you on was because you were promoting the idea of people-led net zero.
Mhm.
So perhaps you could expand for us what you mean by people-led net zero.
Yeah, so people-led net zero is it's a concept, but it's also a research centre. And within this research centre, we're working to help industries realise the potential of putting people at the heart of making changes. And I think that's really critical because we're not technology driven, which is potentially a difficult thing for me as a professor within the Department of Mechanical Engineering to say. Um, Technology is often part of the solution, but we do know that if people aren't willing to use the technology, or if the technology is not rolled out appropriately, or if people not front and center, then the change doesn't happen. So we're working with colleagues in different universities with a number of test cases to really make sure that we can work out how we can decarbonize with the minimum impact to people, which is seen at the minimum poor impact to people, but the maximum benefits to people.
Mhm. So could you give us some examples of what, they don't have to be of your work, they could just be more general case studies of what hasn't worked and what has worked?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting when you took as a case study, which is often talked about, is cook stoves, which are often used, or people designing new cook stoves to be used in developing countries where they're using biomass burning within the houses. And often this is a problem. It's a problem for air pollution. It's a problem for all sorts of things if people are burning sticks, etc., and fuel within the home. And so lots of technology has been developed, lots of solutions have been put forward, but they've not actually been used. And they've not been used because we've not asked people how they want, why they're doing what they do as they do it and what the additional benefits to that are. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, okay, well, actually, you tell us what the problem is. We might understand what the bigger problem is of, catastrophic climate change or of particular problem, but you tell us within your business and with your industry what it is that's not working for you. Or, we've seen some of these. Another example is some of the hydrogen trials in the UK that haven't worked because people haven't been on board, because they've been scared of the technology, or because there's been media backlash, for one reason or another. And what we want to do is say, okay, well, you tell us what your concerns are. You tell us what actually you think the issue is and where we can help. And then we can try and put together whether it's a technological solution or a solution of trying to make different things which we know work in isolation, try and put them together to create a solution for them.
Yeah. One of my favorite examples of that was Nestle, who unfortunately the factory is now shut, but had a local factory, and they had a salary sacrifice scheme for people who wanted to buy EVs, but they
Hmm.
also borrowed some EVs and let people take them home and try them out for a while,
Hmm.
because that experience lowered a lot of the sort of
Yeah.
psychological fears. So is that the kind of thing that you're finding works, or do you have any other examples of best practice?
Yeah, things like that definitely do work. If you allow people to see things, you embrace the situation. So if you can say, okay, well, for example, heat pumps is something else that people are anxious about getting. They say, oh, well, if you need a heat pump, you need to take out all of your radiators and you need to replace it with underfloor heating. But if you can actually go and see someone who's got a heat pump with a house that's pretty much similar to yours, then you can see that it would work for you. So similar to your electric vehicle. And similar, some of the examples that we're working on within people-led net zero, we're still very early stages in this particular project, but we're working on decarbonising buildings. I live in Bath. There's an awful lot of Georgian buildings in Bath, and it's sometimes very difficult for people to envision what a decarbonised, heated Georgian house might look like.
Mhm.
So it's really trying to say, okay, well, what are the challenges for you? What are the challenges for the local authority, for the heritage trusts? And really trying to put all of these things together. So it's very much a whole systems thinking approach.
Yeah. And if I may make a plug for a couple of episodes ago, we had Alex Hilton, who has decarbonised his 16th century Grade 2 listed farmhouse. And heat pumps doing a fine job there.
Fantastic. And heat pumps doing a fine job in my house too.
Well,
Not
I'm one of
not a
those.
16th century farmhouse though, sadly.
Yes, I'm one of those people who hasn't got. It's in the planning stage, or the early planning stage, I should say, but I
Yeah.
haven't made the leap as yet. But partly for those reasons that you're talking about, is you hear these things that you can't put a heat pump in an old building, you'll have to
Hmm.
the radiators, etc., etc. And then when you see case studies that where people have done this and it's not a problem, it really does lower the mental barriers to acting.
And that's really what we want to do within this. We want to have these test cases or case studies where we can say, like, come and have a look and see what we've done, understand what the challenges was, so what the challenges were, sorry, and what the solutions are, have been, will be, and then see how you can roll it out to what your challenges are.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've also released a number of what you call frontiers reports on a
Hmm.
whole raft of industrial decarbonisation. And you've already mentioned hydrogen. But well, I'll pick up on hydrogen at the start because I'm a hydrogen skeptic. Part of this is through personal experience because I tried to get a waste heat recovery project uh, in the thinking, at least, for a new housing estate on Teesside, which would have been zero additional carbon. It was waste heat from a gas-fired power station, which was only contributing to the Tees Valley microclimate. But we were blocked because the hydrogen economy had the small and large p political zone filled up, but those houses have all got gas combi boilers in them. They didn't get hydrogen, and they could have had our waste heat if they'd wanted it. So that's my slight personal beef, but I'm starting to cleave to the view because this is 20 years on. There's still no carbon economy on Teesside, and we're still hearing the same pitches for it. So, will the hydrogen economy ever happen, in your view?
Um, it's a great question, and I think the answer has to be, from my perspective, it has to be yes. Um, I think we need hydrogen, particularly to decarbonize industry. One of my colleagues would be very upset if he's listening when I say I'm not sure we're going to have hydrogen within people's houses, but I definitely think it's going to be part of the solution for industry.
Right. So the hard to abate.
Absolutely, because we can't, to decarbonize, as you know, we need to electrify more of our systems, we need to electrify a lot of our industry, but some things are just very difficult to electrify. So there's that on the one hand, but on the other hand, also, the more we electrify, the more electricity we need. And if we're going to go down the renewable technologies, which we would need to do and to meet our clean power 2030 targets and our net zero targets, um, this power isn't what we call dispatchable. So it comes when it comes. So you need to be able to couple it with something to help you store the power. Hydrogen is one option along with batteries. So we could create the hydrogen where, instead of curtailing power from wind, for example. And then we can use that within these difficult to transform industries.
Yes. But I think back again to Teesside because everybody was talking about hydrogen. I bought this little toy car
Hmm.
science experiment type toy, and it had an electrolyzer. Well, it was a sort
Hmm.
of it would work both ways. It was electrolyzer and a fuel cell, so you
Yep.
could electrolyze water on the windowsill of our office, create some hydrogen, plug it into the car, and off the car would go. And we used it to for schools projects and things. But the thing I always remember was the instructions explained that you lose half the energy you put in the electrolyzer, and you lose another half of what you had in the hydrogen when you put
You
it
turn
in
it
the fuel
back.
cell. So
Yeah.
it's always, and that's just physics.
Hmm.
You could argue you could capture some heat from the fuel cell, but pretty much you're not going to get a better return out of a hydrogen transformation than that. So personally, that's what I'm still yet to be convinced that it's going to have anything more than a niche use. And then once you're down to a niche use, it's very expensive.
Hmm. No, agreed. I think it needs to be more than a niche use, and I think it will have. I mean, the demand for hydrogen in industry already is quite significant. Um, and I think that that's something that needs to be clean hydrogen, so it needs to be from the electrolyzer, it needs to be from renewable electricity. Once we have that, then I think then the markets for the other things could take off. But I don't think we're at a position where we're going to have so much hydrogen that we're looking for ways in which to use it. I think though, there's got to be other methods for decarbonizing most things.
Yeah. And then one of the other things I tend to take a slightly skeptical eye to is carbon capture and storage because,
Hmm.
again, over 20, 25 years, I've been told it's going to happen. We have very few and very small scale CCS plants in practice.
Hmm.
When I first myself got into the sort of sustainability space, we were talking about clean technology as opposed to end of pipe,
Yep.
and CCS is end of pipe. And I'm still not quite sure why we're putting so much money into it when it hasn't delivered very much to date, and whether it's sort of a slight wishful thinking that we can keep
Mm.
using fossil fuels when I don't think personally that CCS is going to come and save us. Sorry, I'm talking too much here. What is the view? What are your views on this? I don't want to get you into any more trouble with your colleagues.
No, that's fine. So the Frontiers reports you mentioned are part of another project that I'm involved with called IDRIC, which is the Industrial Decarbonisation Research and Innovation Centre, which is why
Yeah.
we call it IDRIC. And that's been working with the industrial clusters. So Teesside is one of them, as you've mentioned. And there has been a lot of work on CCS and carbon removals as part of IDRIC. And I think it's an interesting one. If you'd asked me 20 years ago what my views on nuclear were, as a good environmentalist, I would have told you that we shouldn't be having nuclear. But as we've been inactive for 20 years, my views have changed. And I think I would say almost the same with CCS, although I am still definitely a skeptic. Um, in an ideal world, I don't want CCS unless it is direct air capture, which is very difficult to do and very inefficient. But we do have too much carbon in the atmosphere, and we need to stop putting carbon into the atmosphere. And ideally, we need to be removing carbon from the atmosphere. There's different ways in which we can do that. We can change our entire system, which is what I would like to do, creating new fuels and new ways, everything electrified as much as possible and not putting more carbon into the atmosphere. But as you've mentioned, there are things which are very difficult to decarbonize. So unless people are willing to have a very substantial change in the way in which they live, I think possibly we will have to go down the route of CCS to some extent, but I wouldn't want to see that as a long-term solution.
Mhm.
I think it has to be part of the mix so that we're enabling society to continue in the way that we're currently running to some extent, enabling us to travel, etc. But not using the funding for that to stop the funding into some of the more novel mechanisms for decarbonising. That'd be my view.
Yeah. So you'll have to excuse me for having been grinding my a few axes that I'm constantly grinding. So I'll flip the question around. What new or emerging technologies are you most excited about? What do you think is going to is likely to deliver at scale that we're not doing in the mainstream at the minute?
Well, I think if I flip the question slightly, if that's all right, I think one of the most exciting resources we have is sewage because it's not going away. And there's nothing much we can do with it. And at the moment, we're chucking it into the sea and the river. And I think we could probably all agree that that's not a good thing to be doing. So I'm keen to see more research into what we can do with this. And some of the projects that I've been working on with colleagues from the University of South Wales, I've been looking at using this and some waste carbon and some waste heat to explore ways of making some of the precursors to plastic materials, but from sewage.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I'm really interested in is if we've talked about decarbonisation and you've hinted at defossilization, and the two things are slightly different. So if we stop using fossil fuels, though, we need to make our materials from different feedstocks.
Mhm.
So we need to do everything. We need to have the fuels, we need to have the materials, and to do that, we need to have lots of novel technologies and novel solutions. So I think the circular economy, whereby we stop throwing things away and we stop throwing our sewage into the rivers and the seas, that's what I'm really excited about. I'm really excited about some of the materials we can use from this. And I'm really excited about how we can disrupt some of our industry and some of our businesses to actually say, well, you will be incentivized to take someone else's waste and turn it into something useful because we know we can do it. We just need to work out how we do it. And again, that's where the people come in. You know, changing these systems is as much about people as anything else. And if you think about sewage, you tell someone that their plastics is made from sewage, they might not be overly over the moon about that. But you know, again, if you bring people along in the part of the journey, then I think that changes the situation.
What sprang to mind was I haven't seen it in real life. I've only seen pictures. Is the biogas powered bus in Bristol just down the
Oh yeah.
from you, where the graphic on the side of the bus made it look as if all the passengers were sat on the toilet, which I thought was a very clever piece of
Yeah.
marketing,
Yeah.
because it definitely caught the eye. I
Hmm.
don't know if that's still running as a service, but yeah. So let's take sewage then. Do you have an idea of what the scale is? Because I know our local water company has a reasonable size anaerobic digestion plant
Hmm.
converted into biogas, but it's not going away as you say it will be with us. But how much of is there,
How much sewage is there? That's
or how much could it contribute? What's the size of the prize? I suppose.
Yeah, well, I think it wouldn't just be sewage. It will be sewage plus other sort of food wastes, etc., which will all go together. And it won't just be biogas. And I think it will be many different things. And I think if we're clever with it, I think we can create a substantial amount of our materials and fuels from this. But
Yeah.
again, it comes down to as well, people are looking at making sustainable aviation fuels from sewage. But if we keep upping the amount of fuels we use, then there's no way we'll ever be able to meet the demand.
Mhm.
But if we're careful with how we use these feedstocks, then I think we'll be able to meet the majority of them.
Well, you mentioned sustainable aviation fuel. I know you've got an interest in that, and I was going to ask you a bit later, but I'll ask you now about it. Perhaps you could sort of set out the state of the art in sustainable aviation fuel.
Um, well, Sustain I'm not sure I can set out the state of the art, but people are obviously looking at sustainable aviation fuel in great detail, and there's lots of different companies who are looking at making sustainable aviation fuel. And are indeed doing so. So people are making sustainable aviation fuel from used cooking oils and waste fats. They're making it from crops. They're making it from sewage, as I mentioned. Um, and I think it's interesting to see that whilst we've got pilot plants and we've had flights using sustainable aviation fuels, we've got massive targets to increase the amount of sustainable aviation fuels. Heathrow's got a huge target for SAF in the next few years. But the Climate Change Committee, I think, very recently kind of changed track a little bit, moving from just wanting sustainable aviation fuels to going alongside some of this carbon greenhouse gas removals that we were talking about a moment ago, because they didn't see, I think, that there is going to be enough sustainable aviation fuels quickly enough to meet this ever increasing demand. So I think aviation fuels currently about 7% of our emissions, because not because it's growing hugely, but other things are falling
Falling, yeah.
around it as well. Um, so I think the state of the art of the new fuels is potentially in jeopardy if we look more at the CCS rather than just focusing on developing the fuels, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I should probably add for our international viewers that the Climate Change Committee is the independent advisor to the UK government, who
Yeah,
are very
apologies.
clever people who like ruling the rule over these things. Yeah, I looked up. I saw that SAF has 0.3% of the market for aviation fuels at the minute. So when you say substantial increases at Heathrow and elsewhere, it sounds like we're at the very bottom of the S curve in
Absolutely.
terms of, and then the reason why I was sort of asking about the scale of whether it's sewage or
Mm.
waste cooking oil and things. We've been looking at waste cooking oil for decades for biodiesel and whatnot.
Yeah.
Is there a market, or sorry, is there a supply enough to meet a substantial chunk of the demand? I'm not expecting it to meet all of it, but even a substantial chunk.
I don't think there is enough to meet a substantial chunk of it as it stands. Many of the companies might disagree with me,
Mm.
but certainly if we continue to fly at the level that we're flying at the moment, and if we want any of this feedstock for anything else, then no. And I think that's one of the difficult things that we face. You know, if we're not able to continually take fuel out of the ground, then we have to be far more efficient with the fuels and the feedstocks and the resources that we have. And if we're wanting to use the sewage and the waste oils and the waste food, etc., for materials and for any of the hard to abate industries, then there's less and less of it available for flying, and vice versa.
Yes, and then we get into the difficulty if people are actually growing energy crops, then are
Mm.
we taking land away from either food production or from natural habitats? It all starts to get very difficult, doesn't it?
It does, and there's lots of international treaties and agreements to try and stop things like illegal deforestation of the Amazon for for growing crops for fuels. But there are reports that that is still happening, and that's obviously not something we would want to happen when we're trying to decarbonize.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing you're involved with is the Green Industrial Future Centre for Doctoral Training. So,
Yes.
tell us about what the centre does and how you're trying to who you're trying to train and to do what.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about this. I mean, I'm excited about all of my work, but I love the Centre for Doctoral Training because we are working with PhD researchers. So it's aimed at graduates in any discipline who have an interest in green industrial futures. And what we do within our Centre for Doctoral Training, or CDT, is we train our PhD researchers in cohorts. So there's 4 universities involved, and each university has an intake every year of PhD researchers. And we have engineers, we have scientists, we have psychologists, social scientists, and I love that because as a whole systems person, that's part of the bread and butter. I know we need all of these people to help make our green industrial future. So I love that it's interdisciplinary. And each of our researchers has their own project. Some of them are co-funded with industry partners, some of them are not. And they're all off doing their individual research projects, but they get together on 1 to 2 week residentials a couple of times a year where they're looking at really big challenges. So some of them have just been looking at sustainable aviation fuel, and we've been looking at some of the environmental psychology associated with a just transition.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a really fun way of learning, I think.
Yeah, I can see that. I never finished my PhD. I submitted as an MPhil instead, and one of the weird things about it is you are often working on your own.
Mhm.
Apart from the occasional chat with your supervisor. So I can see that cross fertilization of ideas would be quite a powerful way of learning.
Yeah, and I think it does try and battle some of that isolation because, you can be very isolated as a PhD student, but if you're working as part of a cohort, you've got friends who are there who just have your back. They're not in competition. There's no competition. You either get your PhD or you don't, and hopefully they all do. And they're there and they're your friends for life. They're your peers wherever you end up across the globe. These PhD researchers I think will be friends for life, and they'll all be off doing all sorts of different things, and they'll be able to pick up on the phone and say, "Oh, I remember back when I was doing my PhD. You were the psychologist. Can you help me with this problem?" Or the other way, or someone might have a technical problem, and I think we're creating the cohort of future leaders who are needed to deliver a just transition to net zero.
Yeah. Then I suppose going back to some of the stuff we were talking about, I suppose you mentioned the psychology of it. We still have a situation where net zero has become politicized. Where
Yeah.
in the UK we had a reasonable consensus until recently,
Hmm.
and that breaking of consensus seems to have unleashed a flood of misinformation. Whether it's about heat pumps, whether it's about EVs. We're
Mm.
told EVs won't work in the cold, and people say they're not as good in the cold, but neither's a diesel. And
Mm.
yet, sorry, I have to formulate my question. I suppose, are you training them in some ways to find a way of communicating science and engineering facts, and as opposed to hoping that people will take a sort of rational argument at face value when there's so much misinformation flying about?
Yeah, absolutely. Communication of the science and the engineering, the technology is so important. I think we're not doing our job well enough if our researchers aren't able to communicate what they're doing and why it's important. But on that note about the polarization, I totally agree, and it's very disheartening. But I was talking to some colleagues from the University of Leeds last week, and I thought they were doing some research which I thought was really fascinating. Um, they've surveyed a large number of people and discovered that everyone, but particularly politicians, were underestimating everybody else's desire to act on climate change and their views on net zero. So it means that we all think that more people don't like net zero than actually do. So I think that's potentially good news, but it's also potentially bad news if politicians and people who are communicating most vociferously continue to get the message across that everybody doesn't like net zero. So I think we do have some serious work to do on changing the rhetoric on net zero. And I think the sooner we do it, the better, because I think at the moment it seems like more people believe in it and are fond of the things we need to do than is being widely reported. But that might change quite quickly.
Well, I saw a poll today that across the UK population, it's 60% support net zero to
Okay.
25% don't. And even the ones that don't, some of those were green voters. And I suspect they're people who think that net zero is greenwash rather than that net zero
Oh, okay, right. Yeah.
thing. So even those stats. But the other polling I saw during the summer was that it skews very severely with age.
Hmm.
So the skepticism is very highly concentrated in 65 years plus.
Okay.
So I know that some of your doctoral students will be older, but I assume that most
Hmm.
of people, your students and people you're dealing with are in the sort of 18 to 24 age bracket. Do you feel that they are more interested in net zero, perhaps, than I was going to say our generation, but I think you're a bit younger than me. I've got a bit grey around the chops. But yeah, but that generation coming through, do you think they have a different attitude to the whole situation, or am I putting words in your mouth?
No, no, I'm just pausing to think about this. It's I think, well, I mean, definitely the people I come into contact with are people who have potentially sought out to learn about energy and net zero. So I might not be seeing a representative of normality. But of the undergraduates that I teach, they're definitely interested in this subject. I run one of the most highly signed up to optional units in the mechanical engineering department, so more people are doing it. So, and that's on energy and the environment. So I think people are interested. We just need to make sure that I think the other things that people are interested in at the moment are obviously getting jobs and being able to buy a house and all of this kind of thing. And there's tensions between the cost of new infrastructure, the cost of electrification, and the cost of doing other things which everybody wants to do. So it's trying to make sure that the cost of doing net zero isn't something that puts people off. And as part of that, I would say we need to think about the cost of not doing net zero. So that is also important. But to get back to your question, I think people in the age group of the students that I come into contact with are generally relatively positive about needing to do something about net zero.
So you don't have any problems in filling your courses, I suppose.
No, not at the moment. No.
Yeah, I did. Just an aside, I did this time last year. I was running a series of seminars for students across all subjects taught by Newcastle Business Schools. So they weren't self-selecting in any way, and I was very enthused by their enthusiasm.
Yeah.
It made me feel a lot better every Friday when I got the graveyard shift, but every Friday afternoon I actually came home with a little bounce in my step because they seemed to get to really enjoy it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I'm really pleased to hear that. And I do feel the same, when I go and lecture, I come back and I think, yeah, that was great. We've got some really good questions and some really good engagement. So it is really nice. And we at the University of Bath, we teach all of our first years. They all do a carbon literacy course. And I don't teach that, but I do work with people who do, and they say the same, that people are really keen and really enthused about it.
Fantastic. And we've covered a huge range of topics because your research interests cover a the range of topics related to net zero. But just to sort of finish up, um, do you have any sort of overriding conclusions or principles or maxims that you find cut across all those areas that you could share with us?
Yeah, so potentially, I think looking at things from a whole systems perspective. So that's one of the things that really underpins all of my research and everything that I do. I use a tool called life cycle assessment sometimes, and that is trying to help us understand, some of these perturbations, sorry, of, if you make one change, what happens next, and trying to understand the consequences. So I think with all of these things, we need to look at them from a whole system. So we need to be interdisciplinary, and we need to make sure that whatever we do, people are front and center. So we're not making changes to people, but we're making changes with people, or the people are making the changes themselves. with the information that we can provide. I see that would be definitely most important. The other thing I think that's really important is the pace at which we can electrify a lot of our systems. And again, that's not just technology, that's the whole system. It's the infrastructure, it's the connectors, it's everything that's not very exciting. But those are the bits that are needed to make it all work. So again, we need to be really thinking about how we get electricity from A to B, the whole system, and making sure that that all works.
Hmm. So that's the sort of whole system thinking, I suppose, is sums all that up,
Mm,
including people led into that as
absolutely.
well.
Yeah.
Right, well, thank you very much for that. That was fascinating. Thank you for joining us, Marcel, and I look forward to listening through again because there was so much information there. It always takes me two goes to pick it all up.
Oh, well, thank you so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.